From the outset, the Bible, specifically the Old Testament, depicts a world completely alien to a 21st century audience. Genesis begins with God creating the universe and what are ostensibly the first humans to ever exist, placing them in the Garden of Eden. God also plants two special trees in this garden, the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. These new humans, named Adam and Eve, are commanded to live and work in spiritual and physical paradise, and told not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. However, they transgress God's command and partake of the forbidden fruit of this tree, and are expelled from the paradise of Eden. Numerous questions arise from these events. Is the Bible really saying the universe is only 6,000 years old, and that Adam and Eve are the first humans ever created? This seems to contradict the clear evidence before our modern eyes that the world and universe are much, much older, as well as the fossil record clearly showing that people have lived on the Earth for a very long time. Further, the events themselves seem like a sort of children's tale. Two innocent, naive humans are placed in literal paradise, told not to eat a tree's fruit, but a talking snake convinces them to do so. They listen to said snake, eat, and become aware of evil, resulting in God banishing them from the paradise of Eden. What is going on here? This all seems very childish and storybookish. There must be more than first meets the eye. So, we must venture beyond the page and into the depths of wisdom that is the Jewish mystical tradition and associated rabbinical commentaries. According to Jewish mysticism, the globe is not, in fact, merely 6,000 years old. Rather, it has existed for far longer. Both the Jewish Talmud and mystical sources state that God fashioned the earth to undergo myriads of 6,000-year civilizational cycles, recycling the earth for new life over and over again. This means Adam and Eve were the first humans created for our current round of civilization, following the many batches created for previous world cycles. This answers the two questions first raised pertaining to the seeming contradictions between the archaeological and geographical record and the Bible. The world is, in fact, very old, and there were indeed humans who pre-existed Adam and Eve. God reset the world after the preceding 6,000-year cycle and reformed the earth to prepare it for the new Adam and Eve, as well as the new animal and plant life of our current world. But what about the events themselves as relayed in Genesis? Are we to understand them as the simplistic children's story they appear to be? The answer is, of course not. There is much deeper wisdom and context within the narrative than at first glance. The sin of Adam and Eve was not merely the eating of a simple fruit after being convinced by a talking snake. The actual events are far more mystical and realistic than that. We must first understand that Adam and Eve were formed and brought to life by the proverbial hand of the infinite God, Yahweh himself. They were taught all the wisdom and secrets of the universe, and were spiritually and physically mighty beyond the comprehension of modern man. They were placed in a Garden of Eden, a sublime paradise on earth, and were given the task of living an immortal, hardship-free life of farming and cultivating the land of paradise. They lived in spiritual bliss amidst the manifest presence of God in Eden, with no challenge or hardship to afflict them. They were, however, given one command, or more specifically, a choice of historical proportion. The deep secret behind the two trees of Eden lies in what they represented for the future of mankind. God prophetically showed Adam and Eve two trajectories for the next 6,000-year cycle of mankind. They could, A, choose to embrace the tree of life, which meant continuing their immortal, blissful existence in paradise, with no hardship or suffering for them or their descendants. This path meant continuing to exist with limited free will, however, as paradise possessed the presence of God, making the choice for evil virtually non-existent. Or, B, eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, thereby choosing to ingest evil into their very psyches and be expelled from paradise. They chose option B. The obvious question is, why? Why did they willingly do so? The answer to this question offers a tremendously deep secret into the nature of the human race and how God created man in his image. Genesis states that God created the human race in his image. On the most fundamental of levels, this means that humanity possesses the choice for free-willed, intelligent thinking just like God. Animals are creatures of pure programmed instinct, while humans have a godly soul and therefore possess the capacity for intelligence and choice. God also programmed the race of man to despise handouts, or living solely off of someone else's generosity. What people actually truly crave is to earn their keep, be it making an independent income to pay their own way in life, or a path of earning the reward of the afterlife. If, for example, children had to live off their parents' handouts for their entire lives, they'd come to resent it, as they'd never be their own man or woman so long as they're on the take. People crave freedom and independence. They crave the rewarding feeling of being their own person and earning the rewards of their hard work. This is the ultimate truth behind the tale of Adam and Eve in Genesis. The story of a couple given all the spiritual and physical blessings of bliss and prosperity, yet who rejected them, knowing it was the correct path for them and their descendants. It sounds counterintuitive, but it's the searing truth. They knew that true free will to choose between good and evil could never be were they to remain in the perfect Edenic state. Paradise, with its eternal godly handouts and no earning variable, was actually an extremely dissatisfying state of being. They knew that humans would be dissatisfied with never needing to earn the perfect Edenic reward, which would make the perfect state of Eden supremely imperfect. And so, they implemented what they prophetically perceived to be God's true plan for history, for them to eat of the forbidden fruit and be cast out of Eden. For them, and all future humanity, to live in a world of everyday struggle, toil, and hardship on the 6,000-year march of returning to Eden with the eventual Messianic era. They knew that the true experience of living in this world only comes about through overcoming challenge, suffering, and hardship, something simply not possible were they to remain in paradise. The dynamic of earning reward could only be birthed were they to voluntarily leave the Garden of Eden and subject humanity to challenge and toil. And so they did. This leaves us with two pressing questions. What was the nature of their sin? Were they really commanded simply to not eat a simple fruit? Further, who or what was the talking snake? The answer is as follows. The temptation God placed before Adam and Eve was the challenge of their first joining together in intimacy. The choice provided was whether to wait for the seventh day of Sabbath to mate for the first time as husband and wife after having been created on the sixth day, thus eternally remaining in Eden as immortal beings, or be intimate right away, proverbially eating of the forbidden fruit, and set humanity on the course for toil and suffering. In their endless perceptive wisdom, they chose the latter. The identity of the snake character, however, was none other than the archangel Samael, who is the heavenly Elohim prince of temptation and sin. He appeared to Eve and presented to her the option of violating God's command and setting her and Adam on the path of toil and suffering for both them and their line. She became convinced of this approach and persuaded her husband on the morality of this trajectory for their descendants. It is currently the year 2025, and we are still living with the consequences of their decision 5,786 years ago.